welcome to the Bad at CSS Podcast. My name is David East, and yes, I'm bad at CSS. I wanted to start this podcast because I have a lot of questions about CSS. Why can't I use the marquee tag anymore? What does 100% mean? Because it definitely doesn't mean 100%. What does important mean? And why do I use it in all my styles? How much could a flexbox flex if a flexbox could flexbox? I figured there's gotta be a lot of people who have these kind of questions too. I've worked in developer relations for many years now, and this has introduced me to a lot of people who are great at CSS. In this podcast, I'm going to have conversations with the people who are good at the CSS. And you know what? Even ask them hard questions. How do you center things? Should you use Tailwind or jQuery? Who would win in a fight with a bear? Margin or padding? Can you please fix my code? The very first guest on this podcast is none other than Adam Argyle. Adam is a developer relations engineer at Google, just like myself. But Adam knows a metric ton about CSS.
Seriously, you just whipped out like a perfect, succinct clamp? Nice.
Knowing CSS is literally his job. He's on the CSS working group, you know, the people who work on the CSS standards. He's the author of VizBug, the greatest front-end developer companion tool. He co-hosts the CSS Podcast. He writes some of the best articles you will find on CSS from web publications like web.dev, Smashing Magazine, and CSS Tricks. His code pens are absolutely fantastic. In this episode, I asked Adam, how do you feel good about the decisions that you make in CSS? Decisions like, do I use concrete breakpoints or fluid resizing functions? And basically, how do I stop second guessing myself when I'm choosing a layout strategy, or any strategy for that matter? This episode was supposed to be about design tokens, but we quickly digressed into this topic of making CSS decisions, and you know what, it just worked. So I hope you enjoy this conversation and you learn to rest easy in the CSS decisions you make. It's interesting that we were talking about like big blocks versus little blocks. When I start designing something out, or just actually even just building it out in general, even if I'm like, all right, let's just start small, like just a little piece here. The thing that always gets me is I think about how it's going to either size up or size down. And I feel like I can't ever get over that hurdle in my mind. Like if I know I can, let's say I design something that looks really good on a big screen and I'm like, oh, this looks really good. I got this huge font that like on a desktop just feels very like grand and feels almost like a print. So like this right here, I have this text specifically small. I think that's like 2.5 rems or something like that. And in a print magazine, you would actually have this, if you were seeing an article, and that's sort of like my new thing is I really would like, I would like to think about blog posts of like, oh, what did happen when we used to like buy magazines? And you would have these like, you get them once a month and they would have these really cool, like this is this theme. And I feel like sometimes with web development, we've gone so big with like design systems and stuff like that we have kind of forgot that like, well, this all derives from documents, which derive from print magazines and newspapers. But like every once a month, there can be like a totally new like theme and layout and everything. And I've been thinking about that a lot, and that could be a whole other
That is a whole other
episode.
thing. There's a tension between design systems and actually being interesting.
Yes.
Does the more your design system is abstracted and normalized and has pleased itself and has been self-servient, a design system will look bland and empty and have no personality or character. It's all sterile and it's not interesting. The only way to create interesting things is to break the system. You have to introduce quirky.
Yes.
Anyway. So yeah, there's always been this tension. It's hard.
You know what? I said I wasn't gonna do it. Said I wouldn't go off on tangents, but it's got me. Okay, so I'm like, tag, I'm in. So actually, I've been reading this book, and now I can't remember the name of it. I totally spaced on that book, on the quote. That was bad. So I'm just gonna cover it here. The book, it's called Layout Essentials. It was 2 words, and the quote, it quoted the book, which I got right. That was Making or Breaking the Grid. And the quote, if I can find it here, here it is, the quote. A grid is truly successful only if, after all the literal problems have been solved, the designer rises above the uniformity implied by its structure and uses it to create a dynamic visual narrative of parts that will sustain interest page after page. Timothy Samara. I am so sorry, Timothy. You'll have to see how bad I butcher it coming up here, but it was pretty bad. But that's the real quote I was trying to get to. Yeah, I can't remember the name of it, but it quoted another book, and I think I can remember that one. And so the book is called like Making and Breaking the Grid. And so this book is all about like grid principles. So like, and then what I think is interesting is grids can feel very like pleasing in a very like nice and structured, even edges, like uniformity.
Yeah.
And what this one book had a quote they quoted from, and I'm going to completely butcher it. I wrote it down because I thought it was really good, because I was like, I'll write this down so I can remember it. Now that I have to remember it, I'm like, it didn't work. It's like something like a grid is like only truly successful after you achieve its uniformity, that you're able to like sort of like break past that uniformity in an interesting way. So basically, like that's probably the person who quoted that was like, that is not what I said.
Well, no, this is just like the music industry. You have to understand the theory in order to break it and make an interesting song. The people making the most interesting songs are the ones that understand what they broke and why. And it yeah, and they're saying like a grid is really successful. He said grid is only truly successful if you are able to achieve the fundamental principles of it. So like find the uniformity that we expect as people to find in the grid, but then look where you have to achieve some visual goal. Like what is important? What is something you want to draw the attention to? And then you break right there. And that is so subjective. And whenever I say subjective, I'm always like, that's the right one, right? I'm like, that's so subjective. So basically, like, it's to your opinion of, like, yes, that right there is what we're looking to You mean
emphasize.
Humans have to consume this and like it? Humans,
yeah.
But, oh, wait, they're so hard to please. Okay.
Yeah, it's true. That's a whole other podcast. But basically, yeah, like I like how there's this thing with design or with grids where you're able to say like, all right, once we have found the uniformity, let's find where to break it. And that is where there is, that's where designs truly become interesting, or that's when a grid, this person even said, becomes truly successful. I'll probably put in the description like what the quote was and who said it. But yeah, I thought that was super interesting. And I think that design systems, when we, and I guess this kind of goes back to this topic today of design tokens, is that you have all of these things where you lay out and it creates this rigidity, but there needs to be space to say, okay, when do we break this, and why are we breaking this, and how do we even define the breakages so even they are controlled and measured, I should say.
Nice.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of parallels here to the conversation, because we're trying to establish a basis to build upon, right? Which means we have to harden things, and there's always this tension between like hardening things too early. Did we? What's it in JavaScript when you did performance testing way too early, or you're
premature
optimization. That's such a hard one, isn't it? Because it's always hindsight. You're just like, I'm doing such a good thing right now. I'm optimizing all of my stuff. And then like 2 weeks go by and someone goes, all right, we're changing directions. We're going to go this new way. And you're just like, but I just hardened the whole system to support that.
And I made a virtual scroller, and so now we can handle tens of thousands, not millions of like elements. And they're like, well, there's only going to be 10 on this page.
Yeah, custom properties are that same way. You can sort of like, custom properties can get really unwieldy really fast the more you try to normalize them. Even your stack right here, which is very nice, you can see how it could grow really quickly and kind of get out of control. Yes. Like even basic color systems that I've created with HSL are not really that basic. They're very powerful, very flexible, very composable. right? They have all these other features that we want, but not necessarily simplicity. And that's kind of another tension with a lot of this stuff is CSS can do it. And I think a way that, like for your dark mode example here, that was a very simple, elegant way to do dark mode. Flip a couple properties in one media query. Bam! An entire dark theme. That is power.
Yes,
and that is. But yeah, it came with like a complex beginning, right? Like you had to build this up and be considerate of this end simple case, just like JavaScript and stuff, right? We do all this architecture to have one simple moment with it.
Yeah, and actually, speaking of CSS being like a programming language, where I find a struggle as just like a programmer, regardless of the platform, programming language, or whatever I'm doing, is I'm looking to remove a lot of logical hurdles. So like nested if statements and doubly nested, triply nested loops, like all this type of what we'd usually refer to as like spaghetti code. And so and I find that when I start doing those things, like if I'm just trying to get something done, I'm kind of just like, oh well, no one will see this. But when I care about it, I almost become frozen because I'm like, oh, that is probably one too many if statements. I probably should switch that into like a bit more of a matching system so I don't have these big ways. Or maybe I should just break this out into a map so I can just find it by its key. And I start like really thinking about it. But with CSS, I find that media queries or any type of query at this point, but especially media queries because they have a second dimension to them, with being the actually really 3 dimensions if you think about it, because you have the hey, I want to switch something on a screen. How do I want to change that? Is it less than this one or greater than this size? And then what's that actual size? So there's actually, you're writing a very complex if statement. You're basically saying like, if we're changing the screen size and if it's greater than or less than, and it's this number, do these things. And that to me is like a very big decision. And you end up, and maybe once, maybe twice where you're not thinking that fine about it, it's whatever. But the more you start like media queries or any type of query in CSS can become like a big code smell. And so where I always try to simplify things is like here with these design tokens, is that you're able to say like, all right, I'm going to create all this spec. I'm just going to say like, these are colors. The colors don't ever change. This red color is red color. We might change the brand, but it's still like red color is red color. And then you have this ability to say like, we have all these ones. They're just, these are just, you set them and forget them. And you probably don't forget them, but you just set them. And then you create these ones, and these are more like computed. And then that's where down here I can start saying, okay, in these queries, I can say like, all right, what if you prefer, a dark color scheme, dark mode, then I can flip these values with these specs. So the computed, the used ones versus the set ones. And this is really elegant, but this goes even further. So I'm going to, because this, I don't feel like there's much of an argument here. So I got to make this more interesting. Like, so the argument here is, what about design tokens or like any sort of fluid way is, so like this part right here. So this headline like this, I wish this was more like, I made this really quick, but I wish this was bigger. So like what I could do is like, I want it to feel like this is so cool. So this is 2.75 rems, but I could be like, man, let's just make this 5 rems. And if it updates, boom, like look at that. That automatically just feels cooler, doesn't it?
Yep, a more extreme hierarchy. You're working towards the harmonious 1, 2, 3 punch that designs always love. You've got 1 and 3. You need a 2.
Yes, I do actually. By 1 and 3, do you mean like 1, 3, and then having like a 2 being like would be?
Yeah, it's like how many visual elements, like it's almost like the brain when it looks at a design can't really handle more than 3 cool things to look at. So it's like, show me one super cool thing that you're sure I need to see, a secondary thing that sort of leads me into the third
yes
thing.
Yes, I see what you're saying. Yeah, because in the way where I have this one, this is the cool thing, it grabs your attention, that this is about design tokens. Boom. And then this second one, it's got a different visual treatment to it. It's smaller, it's like a little sub label, but it's all caps. I've spaced the letters out just a little bit, and And then we
Nice.
have a different font, normal text, or paragraph text, that is. Yes, I wanted to, I didn't have time to add like an H2 kind of, I guess it's H2, but and I called this one an H3, should have made this one an H4, but I wanted to have some like paragraph title, like a headline, like sub one.
Yeah.
But I really like this. But what I don't like about this, and this, and there's a couple good modern CSS solutions to this one specifically. But what I don't like, and you know where I'm going with this, is like as you go down, you're like, oh, okay, this is cool. Oh, no. Like, and this doesn't really do it justice. But on a phone, this becomes to the point where you're like, this is taking up so much space, and it doesn't scale down. And where I find my struggle with these type of token systems is I love that I can use them. I love that I can set them. But where do you find like this, this balance between saying, how do I make this more fluid, or when do I go into a media query? Because ideally what I would do here, and I'm really bad at this, you would do something like you would clamp it or something like that with,
Yeah, you could try to nip it with one complex definition. You're like, here's a min, here's a max, right? So you try to like bundle all of your desires into this.
Yeah, or actually I'd probably do it like this, where I'd say like, all right, let's make sure its minimum is 2 rems, its ideal size will be like, and then.
Good memory, knowing you don't need the calc.
No, you don't.
Of that
I know
clamp.
that.
Nice.
You don't need this, and
Nice.
And everyone.
It's really hot.
And
so I'm glad
everyone
you use
who
it there.
might be watching this and saying, I thought this dude said he was bad at CSS and he was just able to pull up this clamp syntax.
Seriously, you just whipped out like a perfect,
The only
succinct
reason
clamp. Nice.
I'm able to do this is because I did the CSS for JS developers course by Josh Comio, and it was phenomenal.
Nice.
I don't think it's open right now, but if you are trying to learn CSS, just keep refreshing that page until it opens, so you can purchase it, because it was really fantastic. It was really good. The section on margin collapse was worth the price alone, which margin collapse is a whole nother episode. And now the fact that I really understand margin collapse, it's been life-changing, because it's not that I use it to my advantage, it's that I know how to eliminate it away.
Yes. Yep.
But so this is cool, because I'm able to, this works, and this I tend to find to be like a really good solution. But yes, this is super complex. Because like even this, like I have to do this for accessibility. And there's so many, and and that's cool that I can do it, but like in a way I don't fall. And this is where my over analyzing, like self-aware part of my brain comes in, and I like that I have this one-liner, but is this worse or better than or equal to just setting, a bunch of if statements with these media queries,
Right. I'm summarizing this mentally as liquid versus adaptive. Liquid with typography has a lot of features that sound really enticing, and I think they have a couple of really great demos. Especially like if you think about like locks, right? You can get really complex about your liquid too, right? You clamped, right? You're liquid in between a relative like min and max. But then you're challenging yourself. You're like, well, liquid is also producing 100 different variants in between those sizes that maybe I don't like. And a magazine article definitely would not be liquid between all of these points. A human would show up and say, this is the right size at this size, right? So this is adaptive versus liquid. I find I start with liquid and get out of it eventually. It's like liquid was my gateway drug into the concept that I wanted something, but I ultimately wanted to grab the reins a little bit stronger.
Did
I cover
think
kind
we
of
can
where
keep
you were
going
going
on
with
that.
Yeah.
I really like that, because like the pragmatic, actually not even the pragmatic, the perfectionist, I was thinking maybe the wrong P word, wants me to be like, hey, let's find the right simple one-liner use case where I get to be like, this is definitively the right way for me to handle sizes. And I think just like getting older in life, realizing like that's not how anything works. You can't ever just be like, oh, did it right. Like I find that there's lots of wrong ways to do things, but to find a right way, that's a whole other discovery process. But I like this because it's one-liner, and if someone's like, whoa, that's really complex, how do you do that? Maybe I can just be like, okay, there's this course, you should go watch that section. There's ways to teach this. But I really liked what you talked about. We're saying like, hey, if I'm looking to be like a magazine, and so now in this 5rem world I'm in, or I'm at max at this point, like this is great. This is big, it's bold. Like if I am the magazine designer, this is what I said I wanted. But then you're like, okay, well, at what device am I going to be at something like this? And this, I'm like, well, actually, maybe I'd want it to be a little bigger than that. That's a little small. So maybe 1.5 rems. And then, okay, that's a little better. But now I'm messing with the...
Yeah, you're getting into the problem spot. This is like, your quick win is now becoming too succinct and powerful and finicky. And you start to, I do the same thing in a lot of my liquid calculations also. And I'm like, how can I find the perfect 1 point something to mix with something else to be okay? And then let's talk about really quick what we just created. When you create these things, they're called magic units, and magic units don't share well with your friends. They don't trap your logic well in them. That was like a one-off moment that you had. This is like a complex regular expression or something that you.
It's like a nested ternary,
code, right? Like someone has to look at it and go, yeah. They're like, what is? Why? I wish they would have shared. Whereas like an adaptive approach where it is much more declarative and maybe it's less clever and maybe it is even more to manage in terms of code. You're getting at least 3 or 4 or however many different breakpoints and adaptive moments to be more specific. And so you'll end up, it's a trade-off, right? You can either go be finicky with a really smart clamp, or you can go be finicky with 3 to 5 media queries that all adjust things and make it manageable that way. It is really hard to say what is right. Yeah, I agree. It's like each case in my styles find a different use case. Like what you did with custom properties there in your media query, where you flipped your theme variables to just using different other color variables. I think swapping custom properties like that in media queries is a future that it's like, I think we should head more towards there. But there's a lot of dancing, really it's orchestrations. Just like if you're in backend and you're orchestrating containers, you've got boxes and they all have ins and outs and different conditions that make them change. It's the same. It's just, I think at the end of the day, this stuff is just naturally complex, especially because the end user is a human this time and not like it's not Kubernetes, it's not AWS. The end user is a human and different humans are going to look at it and want. So sometimes I think grabbing the reins is where I end up, but I start with my quick wins, but maybe I'll end up with a mix, and then I'm in a mixed land, and mixed land is not necessarily the right land to be in
on their bingo sheet. Who on their bingo sheet for this podcast would have thought we would have said Kubernetes, but here we are.
Dude, I'm still waiting for front-end Kubernetes. It will happen. It will happen. We already have containers. We have @container now. We're thinking about components like containers.
Oh.
Why are we not just deploying them with declarative INO?
You are, I think, if we want to be ahead of the trend, if we want to create some like super starred GitHub repo, we should have container orchestration for container queries. We could say like, that could be the library name, be like container orchestration.
Oh, it's like, we'll have like a front-end Kubernetes. We need a cool boat name then.
Yeah, Sperry's. I don't know. Those are boat shoes. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Topsiders. Oh, it'd be front-siders, topsiders, or something there.
But I find that to be really cool where CSS is moving towards is that it used to be the only way to change things was to do it via media query, which is I still find media queries to be just incredibly cool. I remember the first time I used one, and then I just remember like it changed. I think I just
It's reactive
I
programming.
used it for like the traditional, I think, like, 3 columns to 1 column kind of stack. And I remember just being like, oh my gosh, that was such a massive light bulb moment. And then now, and I thought that was also very complex to do, because making those solid, like Bootstrap really popularized the whole like phone, tablet, desktop, super big screen sort of constraint. And I think when we can frame it that way, it feels good. But we know in reality that's really not the case. And then that especially breaks when you're doing things like this, when you start going more liquid. And so now we're given these tools, these primitives from CSS that are like, hey, you can just create these solid ways of looking at it, or you can literally calculate and be liquid. And finding the middle ground between that, or finding just what you want to do, even for not even I don't want to even say middle ground or solution, because it's not that easy and cut and dry, but just literally saying pick one or pick a way to use this. I find that to be very I don't want to say paralyzing, because I'll pick one eventually, but like making that it's hard. Yeah, exactly.
It's choice overload. Yeah, because like just looking at your custom properties here, like there's so many different strategies. Like so take your font size example here with clamp. Like you could actually put custom properties in that clamp. You could have a variable instead of 2 rem, say var min header 1 font size, right? And it's like you have that defined somewhere as like, yes. And then you could have a maximum header 1 font size. And then you have that sort of liquid thing in the middle. And what you could do is in other media queries is adjust the min and the max in the media query. So that what you're doing is sort of like pivoting. In your media queries, you're using an incision, almost like a scalpel. So instead of saying font size is changing, no, you're setting a global variable at this viewport width to have a bigger minimum and a bigger maximum type of thing.
Also,
and there's power in that too, right? Where like the media queries are actually very agnostic to how they're being used. They're just adjusting things based on viewport. And then other components are opting into those and using them or not. And yeah, it's hard to say if this is right, because this is honestly sometimes more confusing. Like there's this thing in my head that always happens where every time you break out code from a file into a new file, or even every time you create a new folder, you're creating mental overhead. So the fact that we just took that clamp, Benihanaed it into 3 different, chopped it up. If you haven't been to a Benihana, if you chop it up into 3 pieces, now I have to go find the 3 pieces to see what they resolve to. And it's like this mental overhead, but you gained a pivoting superpower. You gained an orchestration power. And yeah, I don't know. This stuff is just, it's naturally complex in almost every like direction that you want to take it. But I think what a future that is powerful is this one here. And here you've even written some like local mods there, right? You have like a local min size. Yeah. And so, yeah, we could go into like local and global mods, and how like a media query could pivot all the global ones, but then at the component level, they're sort of,
this is block scoping, basically, Yeah.
It is block scoping for sure.
And so like when I do this, I think it becomes more readable, but at the same time, you're right. Like this is so cool. It's unbelievably cool, but it's also very, I don't even want to say complex, because it's 3, it's just 3 parameters, but it's powerful, and it becomes to the point where like, you can, like, I just, not only did I allow this to be liquid in between and scale down to what I want it to scale down to, I also did this thing where I messed with the font scaling default to the browser. So, like this is going to scale at different rates than maybe the user would expect. And like, that scares me that I can do that.
Yeah, there's so many unknowns, right? You're just like, with a liquid scenario like that, there's, it's just hard. It's, the browser in so many different contexts could do anything.
Also, this is probably underrated too, right here, where I'm talking about like, okay, so this is 7 VW. Well, that is, I love using relative units, because it does, it allows you to, change your size in a very natural way. But it's a bit of a grab bag, and it's a bit of like there's a lot of trust you're putting in that, like, I think the screens are going to be like this. And like, I think this is the way it's going to be. And I feel like when you use relative units, especially relative to the viewport, you're basically signing yourself up in some way to look at your page on some screen, some device somewhere, and be like, that is not what I expected it to look like at all.
It happens to me every time. We have VH, VW, VMin, and VMax. And I swear none of them are ever exactly what I want. They're always just a little off, and I just have to deal with it. I'm just like, whatever. Tiny phones, you'll have a weird
And I'm really
gap
only,
now, I guess.
really only starting to look at container queries, or whatever we're going to call them. But it seems like container queries are also very much in line with all the problems we've discussed today, in the sense of like, you gain more power, but then you gain even more options to second guess yourself on how you're going to do it. Because this is, I feel like this is a lot of responsibility to scale something for the whole size of the viewport. There's a lot of, and also keeping like accessibility, like font scaling in mind. So there's a lot to think about there. Right. But then when you start thinking about scaling to like, okay, what if I can just scale to the size of the parent? That feels a lot easier to like reason about. But just in the same way where once we got Flexbox, or grid, even once you start having, you're like, okay, I have this Flexbox and I've lined this up. Oh, but inside of these cards, I need to line up the card header. And so then there's a Flexbox inside of the Flexbox. And then sometimes you need to line up the icons inside the heading. So there's a Flexbox inside of a Flexbox inside of a Flexbox. And then before you know it, you're like, I don't know what Flexbox I'm in. And then I feel like with container queries, that also becomes the thing where you're just like, what am I containing or querying at this point?
David, you are not wrong. I feel all this stuff. Yeah. CSS sometimes to me, it gets pitched like we're moving boxes. And I even used to, and I still love telling my mom that that's what I do. I move boxes. I define boxes, and people pay me to put boxes on the screen in a certain arrangement. And some people think moving boxes is really hard. But the reality is, it's hard because you're not moving boxes. I think, this is like my modern way of thinking about CSS, is I'm corralling wild animals. Like content, I must be thinking that this content could change in length and all sorts of stuff. Like, the more I assume that this is a wild west and not some rigid box creation environment, the more powerful I've been able to feel as a CSS author, because I'm just like, no, really all I need to do is wrangle you from that maximum and wrangle you from this minimum, and you're healthy from there, right? And I'll move on to the next spot. I'm like, okay, you align this way and you do this with this gap, and then I can like stop thinking about you.
Yeah, I've actually seen that in a lot of the things you've done, because I'm a big fan of your work, and I see that you're one of the few people, if maybe even like the only person I've seen, who constantly leans on the orientation query, where you do like, oh, this is for landscape specifically. And I think that's interesting, because I think a lot of people are like, well, why would I need this? And then correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like that goes right into what you were just saying right there, where you're like, I want to think about this in this specific way. Well, when something gets into landscape, especially on a phone, that's very much that specific way. And that becomes like a world where you can say like, all right, if it's in landscape, I know exactly how to style for that.
Yep. And it comes into, looking at your paragraphs here, just assuming that the paragraph could be like one word and making sure that it would still flow to the next paragraph. And it's like a lot of chaos thinking too. Like after I think a design is done, I'll go give it a chaos test. And that would be me, like we saw in your headers, breaking it to 2 lines, breaking it to 3 lines, and then just being like, how do we handle like a really long header? Because the content team is not going to write short, succinct titles. They're going to write big, long, nasty ones. And so, I like thinking of the web canvas as this huge variability space. And what divs do is just sort of, is it wraps them almost like a function would wrap logic. And then it's on that function to just really make sure that things don't bust out. and maybe create some order. And I don't know, it's like the light. Most of my layout work, I call it direction and flow, where I'm like, did the boxes need to go left to right, and like a set of columns, or do they need to go up and down like a block? Do I need it to wrap or not? And then how much space is between there? And it's like, the more I make generic, and this is why I like Tailwind, and it's just the concepts of making class names that are object oriented, is it's like the more generic you can make things, the less you have to think about it.
Yes.
Right? Like fluid typography is a heavy concept because it has so many potential representations. Whereas like a layout that just says vertical layout with 10 pixels a gap. You're just like, that is a simple layout that is just not complex for me to think about. But inevitably we get into an orchestration space where, you have a grid layout instead of a flex layout, just instead of a flex layout instead of a grid layout. And no matter how simple all those are, the combination of them is still something that you need to just go test in the browser and feel it out. I think there's just a lot of feel out still in there, like color schemes. Like I bet you felt out a lot in this color scheme. You built up those percentages, you built up your calculations, and
it seems like to get to like a nice resolution point here, to like because I think we've gotten to the point where we're like, you can do this and you can do this and all these things, and sometimes they're competing with each other. They're competing solutions. That is like, which one do you choose? I don't know. It's hard. Like that truly is the answer. But I think what I've done, and actually one of the times I had you help me out on a layout once, which seemingly was an easy layout, which you did as one of your GUI challenges, which is just like sidebar and side content. And when the screen resizes, hide the sidebar, emphasize the content, and be able to slide the bar in. Like that is a layout we have seen so many times. And I have also built that many times built it with floats. I've built it with percentages, and I've built it so many different ways. And a lot of times those things can rely heavily on media queries and all this different types of stuff. And you showed me a really cool way of using grid template areas, what's I can't remember the actual name for that is, where you're able to name the tracks. Maybe am I gonna name?
You're doing great. Grid template areas is the named tracks.
I used all the right ones. Look at that.
Yeah, you're doing great.
And you were able to switch the names of it on a resize, which is kind of similar to this now that I think about it, to kind of switch the shape. And you helped me out a lot with that. And I remember trying to get it working. And I remember just being like, every time I change something breaks or something gets weird. And you said, and I didn't even tell you that I felt that way, but you said, I find that when I'm building a layout that they're so wiggly, and that they you just change one thing and something pops out over here, and you do this, and there's so much effort goes into just getting it right into place. And that really made a big difference to me, because I thought, okay, so it's not just me. It seems like maybe the battle isn't finding the perfect, clamp sizes, or finging the right media queries, or using the right amount of media queries. It's kind of like what you're saying is, it's that journey of the wiggliness of finding, after all the resizing and everything, that you can say like, I used clamp for this, but I used a media query for that, and I tested it enough and I feel good about it right now. It seems like maybe that is a point that you can work towards.
I think that's an awesome point, and I'm realizing how exactly that is like every other programming I've ever done. Like, okay, when I deliver a function, if I've written something that intends to perform a function in JavaScript, maybe we'll write tests for it. It's almost like we're more formal about it with JavaScript, because we have ways of testing JavaScript. Like JavaScript can test JavaScript. And what you do is, when you're like, let's say you submit a PR with a new function, it's like someone's going to pass your function something it's not ready for yet. Which is just like CSS getting presented with something it wasn't ready for yet, and you have to go nudge your work. You go nudge your work to account for the case that it didn't account for. And you're right. And I think CSS is almost like you get to a point where you've just accounted for enough of the different cases that you can move on, which is just how any of our programming works.
It's actually
maybe that'll help people feel better about it, is that you won't sit down and get the layout right across 10 screens perfectly. You just won't. Just like your function, like you thought you wrote a pure function that does just exactly, and then all of a sudden your one-liner function turns into 5 lines because it has to do some if checks and it has to account for extra stuff. And I think that actually makes me feel better about it too, that all of my work is always a nudge, adjust, account for other cases until it's stable. Thank you, David.
But actually, you made me think of a really great JavaScript counterpart to this. So like iterating over an array or any, object or, structure is like, effectively 95% of like if your job in JavaScript is someone's like, here's a thing, you need to get over it and change it, or tell us things as they happen. Like that's at least what I find myself doing, is like I am a professional iterator, and I really for the longest time preferred to do everything with array extensions, so like map, filter, reduce, all that. And there was some zen in it for me to see it all sort of line up as like,
I like the zen too, the chain. I like making a chain. I'm like, yeah,
it is really nice. But there are so many different ways to do that. You could use a traditional for loop, or you could go use a for of loop. And the great thing about for of is that there's actually way more power in that than I think most people realize, especially when you get into the world of iterators and then async iterators. So if you have just your typical map, filter, reduce chain set up, but then someone says, oh, but now instead of this in-memory array, you got to iterate over these promises, just like when the screen size changes, you're like, oh, that doesn't work anymore. You might need to switch over to the async iterable to make that easier. And just in the same way where it's like, oh, I had these 3 media queries. Well, maybe now I need to use this liquid clamp. And you understand these trade-offs, or you understand these constraints, and then you stop just saying like, I know I can switch my code to that. I know I can do this, and I made these decisions, and it's going to be fine.
This is such a fun conversation, because I think that a lot of frustration with CSS is that there's always one more thing to do, or it feels that way. And so devs are just like, I'm so tired of it. Like, it was hard enough for me to get the initial thing done, and I'm tired of all of the additional things I have to think about. And the reality is, that's what we've been doing the whole time in every language, in any way. And so it's just kind of weird that CSS gets this different rap, even though it's just like wherever else that they were before they came to the CSS land for a second. Yeah. Thank you, David. That's a good point. And it's almost like Tailwind is almost like loading underscore.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
And, like using a pre-made function when eventually you might actually want to write your own loop, right? And maybe because Tailwind used for each, and you need to use for of, but
you understand,
right? These subtleties, and you have to understand. It's just so many subtleties.
No, I think that's a really, really great analogy, and it's like it doesn't matter, really. What matters is just the constant exploration, the constant. It's understanding the trade-off. It's being able to say in the same way if someone was like, hey, your map filter reduce chain is great, but what happens if someone passes something asynchronous to it? You would be like, well, I would change that then. In the same way if someone was like, hey, your queries, your media queries are great, but what happens if we have to support this type of size? You're like, well, then I would just switch to this. I would just do that. And if you can have that understanding and in that confidence, then it makes life a lot easier to be like, I know I didn't do that thing, but I know I didn't do that thing. And when you know that it feels better than just being like, oh, I didn't even know. It's a lot of no.
Dude, I know what you mean, and I agree.
Well, Adam, that feels like a really good place to wrap it up. And I want to thank you for being the first guest, and just a part of the very first Bad at CSS podcast, the place where it's okay to be bad at CSS.
I'm happy to be here. I don't feel amazing at CSS. I feel tolerant and well equipped, but I still struggle sometimes. So if you're out there struggling, just know even someone you think doesn't. They definitely
if
are.
you feel like you're struggling at CSS and you hear that Adam feels like he's struggling at it, don't go look at his code pen. Don't do it. And now that I say it, you're going to do it, but don't go look at Adam's code pen, because those things are amazing. Your pens are A+ work.
Oh, thanks. My goal is I just want to write the littlest amount I can and get the biggest bang. That's my favorite thing to do.
I fully agree with that. But thank you so much for coming on. I don't know when the next one's going to be or what we're going to do next, but I'm just, we'll end it there. And I guess I should come up with a good ending catchphrase. Thanks for joining us. And until next time, remember, we're probably all bad at CSS, right? We'll see how that one goes. All right.
I like it.
Till next time.